No. Well, they'll just come straight in anyway. We've started streaming now, so I'm going to turn my camera off, and then you just let me know when you guys are ready to start, and we'll start.
Okay. We are ready.
Okay, you ready to go?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in this evening. And myself and my lovely friend, my lovely author friend, Penny Batchelor, we're going to be taking you through creating the perfect page turner. So hopefully by the end of this session, you will have lots of tips and tricks and ideas as to how to make the book that you're working on or one that you're planning, to make it as exciting for the reader as possible. And it's that idea that they always want just one more chapter. So if I introduce Penny is her first domestic noir thriller, My Perfect Sister, was published in May 2020. It was longlisted for The Guardian's Not the Booker Prize 2020 and was a Waitrose weekend book pick. Her second novel, which is called Her New Best Friend, is going to be published on the 5th of August 2021 by Red Door Press. And I have been lucky enough to have had a sneak peek at this book, and it is a twisty little look at motherhood and obsession, and you're in for a real treat.
Thanks, Louise. Yeah, I can confirm I didn't pay her or give her any wine or ply her with drink or anything to say that. Thanks everybody for tuning in and turning up today. So we hope that this session will be great for you, whether you're a writer yourself or you just love thrillers and you want to find out how we authors actually go about writing them. Now, so I'm delighted to be doing this talk with Louise. Louise Mumford's debut speculative thriller Sleepless was published in December 2020, and it reached number 49 in the overall UK Kindle chart. It's been optioned by a Californian production company. Lucky her. That's every author's dream. And John Mars, best-selling author of The One, called it frighteningly inventive. I loved it personally. Again, no money or wine has changed hands, and I did stay up to the wee small hours to carry on reading just one more page, just one more chapter, which is, yes, that's a huge theme of this session today.
Okay, so the first thing that we are going to look at is, what do we mean by a page turner? And I think for me, and possibly for this session, we're going to look at commercial fiction more than literary fiction. However, I do think that literary fiction can still be a page turner. It's just that Penny and myself, obviously, we're working in the commercial market. And I also think that it isn't just thrillers that can be page turners. I think it can go across the genre. So I think it can be romantic fiction, it can be historical fiction. It's anything that just, it's that book that you can't put down before bed, basically.
That's right. Yes, it goes across genres, doesn't it? It could be romantic comedies or lots of other different genres, but it's something where you just want to keep turning the pages.
So the first thing that we thought we'd do is look at your what if idea. So it's your pitch, basically. And the idea is that you are stuck in an elevator with the commissioning editor of your dream publishing house that you want to get published, you want your book to be published in, and you only have a couple of seconds to tell that person what your story is about and to hook them in. So it's known as your elevator pitch. And it's called a what if idea because it's often, what if someone did this, what happened then? And there always has to be some sort of stakes involved. I don't mean the barbecue kind of stakes. There always has to be something at stake. So there's some peril of some kind, whether it's emotional or physical. And if I give you an example from Sleepless, which is my book, it's what if an insomniac takes part in a sleep technology trial that doesn't want to help her sleep, but to control it. And Penny, what would yours be?
Well, I've got two, because I've got two books.
Of course.
My Perfect Sister is my first novel, and it's what if you had to return to the childhood home you couldn't wait to get away from, and you came across family secrets about your missing sister. And for the second one, Her New Best Friend, which is coming out in August, it's how much can you really trust your new best friend, and how far would you go to protect your children if you had to?
Yeah, so it's this idea of what you want people to ask you once you've given your elevator pitch is what happens next. That's the important thing. You want to make the reader always be thinking, oh, what is going to happen next? We don't know. And also, as an aside, an elevator pitch is really important, because I have actually used that, not in an elevator with a commissioning editor, but I did it at a festival, and it was Sleepless, which then got published. So it is very important to make sure you've got your pitch sorted, because you never know who is going to ask you. So the next thing then is to look at structure. So when I first wrote Sleepless, I didn't really have much structure to it. I didn't plan it out beforehand. And then I had a lot of editing to do afterwards to make it tight and to make it work well. So what I did then is and I possibly should have done this before writing Sleepless, I then studied structure and story structure a little bit more, and I'm quite fascinated by it now. So there are lots of different ways, lots of books out there, and lots of different ways to structure your novel. I'll just give you a couple to start off with, but there are lots of really good ones out there. And obviously, we can't go through in this session the whole of how to structure a novel, because that would take a session in itself. It would take a week possibly to go through all of them. So we're just going to go through it fairly quickly. And if you are interested, there is Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. That's the classic one. Save the Cat has also done Save the Cat Writes a Novel, so that takes it through. It's not that long, quite good. And my personal favorite is this one, which is Screenwriting Tricks for Authors, and it's called Stealing Hollywood, and it's by Alexandra Sokoloff. And the details of these books are in the handout, which you can see the link to in your chat box as well. So also, don't worry too much about writing down loads of notes. You can just listen to us, because there is a handout for you to look at afterwards, and it's got all of these points in it. So if you've got a 3-act structure, you're thinking of it in those very distinct acts. And in the first act, it's the inciting incident. It's the beginning. This is crucial to hook the reader in. The main character has to be jolted out of their comfortable life in some way. So the inciting incident in Sleepless is the car accident. Thea is so exhausted that she puts others in danger. But it's also the notification on her phone. A little notification comes up which tells her about this sleep technology trial called Morpheus. Dream your way to a better you, one sleep at a time. It's this idea of promise. It's giving her a promise that something will change. And the inciting incident is really, really important. I would say that even if it's an emotional one, it's not a physical one. Obviously, the car accident is a physical thing there for your inciting incident. It comes from an emotional place, though. She's reached the end of her tether. You've always got to have something like that to hook the reader in, to start your character on their journey of that novel. So Penny, what would you like to give us as an example for your inciting?
Don't want to give too much of the plot away, but in My Perfect Sister, our heroine Annie, she left home when she was 16, and lots of different circumstances come together that she has to go back to her childhood home, age 30, which she didn't want to do. And this sets her on a path towards finding out more about what happened to her sister, her older sister, who went missing.
Yes, so much emotion tied into having to go back to your childhood home, isn't it? That's just a brilliant inciting incident. So if you think of your story, you are on a roller coaster ride with your reader, and you've started off and you're doing the kind of chugging. You're chugging up, 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 and you're going to reach the peak. The peak will be the end of Act 2, and then you will whoosh go straight down into the incredibly scary bit at the end. So as you're moving up to that bit, this is how you're starting to rack up the tension a little bit. And your climax of Act 1 is quite important. It's also, it's called, can often be a threshold moment. A threshold moment means it can actually be, you know, stepping into some sort of new world, which is what my character does in Sleepless. So the threshold moment, the end of Act 1, is her arriving at the island where the sleep technology trial is starting. And I use a bit of foreshadowing because the island is quite grim, and it's described in quite a threatening way because it's not going to have a particularly positive effect on her life. So my climax and that threshold moment is very much a physical one. Again, it's her actually moving into this new world, but it can be more of an emotional threshold. You know, they decided maybe to take this new job, or maybe they've decided on this new partner for whatever terrible mistaken reasons that would be. So then you have, once you've done your Act 1, you move into Act 2, and Penny has a warning for us about Act 2. What do we have to worry about, Penny?
It's avoid the flabby middle. It was Great British Bake Off, Soggy Bottoms, anything like that. It's a big pitfall is you've done your brilliant first act, you've really hooked the reader in, you've got your great first sentence to make them keep reading, and then suddenly it all goes a bit flat. It's like cooking a souffle, opening the oven door too soon, it all just goes. So you've got all this emotion, you've got the plot building up, but then it's a common problem is just not knowing where to go and how to get from the first act to the denouement in the third.
I mean, yeah, I'm sure a lot of us have got flabby middles after being in lockdown for nearly a year. But yeah, you have to be careful in Act 2. It's a great space though, because this is where you can start to bring in your subplots. You can meet your supporting characters. You start to get to know those a lot in Act 2 as well. And each time you can just ratchet up the tension a little bit until you come finally on your roller coaster ride. You come up to that climax of Act 2. And your climax of Act 2 is incredibly important because that's where the bad guys are closing in, metaphorically or physically. And it's often the all is lost moment. It's that point where you think that the good guys might not actually win, whether that's, again, an emotional kind of thing, whether the demons, somebody's maybe struggling with alcohol at that point, they maybe go back to drinking heavily. That would be your climax of Act 2, and you're not quite sure that all is going to work out as you think it is.
That's right, it's about jeopardy, isn't it? That's the moment where it could go either way and you're desperate to find out what happens right at the end.
It can often be a character death as well, not the main character, but sometimes it's a supporting character.
Yeah, you're good at killing characters off.
I'm good at killing characters. None of my characters are safe. It's often, but it could be a death of hope in some way if you're writing something that doesn't involve killing off so many people. And then you've got Act 3. You've got your final Act 3. So you've got to the top and then you are whooshing down, and it's the finale where you're wrapping things up. If you think of something like Harry Potter, for example, there's often a big battle as the finale for Act 3, but it doesn't have to be quite as dramatic as that. For me, and in Sleepless, it was physically trying to, it was not me physically, sorry, Thea physically trying to escape the island. But it's also, and I was quite keen on doing this, it's also the finale of Thea's emotional arc as well. I don't think you can write lots of action stuff without having some sort of emotional side going on as well. I think the character journey is just as important as the plot journey. So for Thea, it's her journey from being very closed off at the start because she's exhausted, to then becoming someone who's actually got very strong emotional links, and she's got a real purpose at the end, not just escaping the island, but she's got other purpose as well.
Yes, and in my novel, My Perfect Sister, our character, the heroine Annie, she starts off being estranged from a family, not wanting anything to do with them, and being quite aggrieved that a lot of the attention was on her missing sister in her childhood, and that she grew up in the shadows of all that. But it's about her and the emotional journey about coming to terms with her childhood and building bridges again with her mother without giving too much away.
So that's the 3-act structure. There are different ways, and different books will tell you to do it differently, and kind of just read around and find what works for you. And even if you don't use all of them, if you've got certain beats to your story, certain pegs to hang your story off, then the skeleton of your story will be sound, and it will create a lovely story creature by the end.
It will. And the next part of our talk is focusing on the importance of plot when you're writing a thriller and you're creating your perfect page turner. Now, if you look at Louise, you will see that she has a massive pinboard behind her with lots of post-it notes with her 3-act structure. Now, that actually fills me with a bit of fear. I don't like that. But I do like to know what my beginning, my middle, and my end is going to be. And when I became a novelist, I heard a term that I'd not heard of before, which is, are you a plotter or are you a pantster? Different novelists have different ways about going about sorting out their plot. And so I did a bit of research into this. And a pantster is somebody who doesn't plot. They just start off with an idea, sit at their keyboard or with their pencil and notebook, and just write it without actually having planned anything beforehand. Famous pantsters are Margaret Atwood and Stephen King. And I once saw an interview with Philip Pullman where he said that for his novel trilogy, although he's written quite a few more since, his Dark Materials, it started off with an image he had in his head of a young girl crawling over the roofs of an Oxford college. And that's it. So he started off writing with just that premise. And then in his imagination, that sprouted the idea for the demons and the whole world that he creates in his Dark Materials. So I personally think that's quite amazing, just to start off with that one idea and then carry on. So being a pantser, it's sort of eschewing starting with a pinboard with lots of post-it notes and just going with the flow, seeing where your characters take you and what comes up in your imagination. But plotters, on the other hand, they might even go so far as to have planned out every chapter and their structure, their arc, the exciting bits, the more quiet bits, the bit where it's action, the bit where it's more on character. They know all this before they start writing. But what plotters and pantsters both have in common is that once you've written your first draft, you have to go over and edit it, because you might be a pantster, you've written your book, but of course you've got to go back and make sure that you've got all those parts in place with your different acts and all those things that we've just been talking about, the beginning, the middle, and the end. And this can be quite a cruel part for an author, because there may be bits that you loved writing, a scene that you spent ages on, you thought was brilliant, but when you actually go back and do your editing within the plot, you realize that it just takes away the focus or the tension away from the main story. So it's got to have the chop, which is, it's cruel, but it's necessary.
Yeah, a good tip is just some post-it notes on a board, just a simple whiteboard, move them around, see how it all fits together, see if you're hitting those main beats of Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And it's just a really easy way. That's what this is, really. It's just a slightly slightly bigger version of that. And as you can see there, I've got some post-it notes. You can see the pink ones there. I've put those on. I don't actually know what I'm doing with those parts of the story yet. I just know they have to be in there. So I haven't worked out where they're going to go, but I know they have to. So physically, for me, seeing them like that, it helps me to really understand the story. I can, to physically move the cards or the post-it notes around really helps. Right, so I think we can now move on to red herrings and misdirection, which is a good tip or trick to create a page turner.
We can, and if you're a crime reader, thriller reader, you'll know that part of the fun of reading them is trying to work out yourself who did it, what's behind it, and there's lots of different plot strands, different reasons why things could have happened. Say, for example, in My Perfect Sister, what did happen to Gemma? And there's quite a few people who may well know more and have done more than they're actually letting on. So what crime and thriller writers do is they provide quite a few possibilities and suspects and give you clues along the way. And the mistress of this is Agatha Christie, of course. So take, for example, Death on the Nile, or together on a boat with no possibility of getting off. There are lots of characters with pasts just waiting to be uncovered by Poirot, and a murder. So you've got to, it's Poirot's job to actually find out who could be responsible. And of course, are they actually telling the truth? Which brings me on to unreliable characters and narrators. That what the character may tell you may not actually be what happened. And what the narrator is telling you, maybe from their own point of view, sort of in sort of common popular language at the moment, it may be their own truth, but is it actually the truth? Now, a good tool that thriller writers use is misdirection. Did a character really see what they thought they saw, or was there smoke and mirrors? Was it smoke and mirrors? Was it a plot devised by the author to bring the reader's attention elsewhere, so you don't actually spot the little clue there that's telling you what it has actually happened? Now, I did a little bit of research, and there was a famous experiment at the end of the last century where individuals were asked to watch people playing basketball and count the passes between the teams. And at the end of the experiment, the people taking part were asked if there was anything that they'd noticed. And half of those people taking part, they actually failed to notice that a person in a gorilla suit walked on, thumped their chest, and walked off again because they'd been so busy counting the basketball passes that they'd not really been concentrating on what else was going on. So that is a trick, and we might not introduce a hairy gorilla, but that sort of thing that a thriller writer tries to do.
I don't know about you, Penny, but I might add in a gorilla for my next book. You might have given me.
I could. No, I mean, it could be a Tarzan and Jane spin-off. I don't know. I reserve the right to be able to include that. But it's the author leading the reader onto a train of thought and enticing the reader to put connections together to make a conclusion themselves that might actually not be what actually happened. And then that brings us on to red herrings, which of course clues that are there to put you off the scent. I'm not actually sure why they're called red herrings. I don't think they're anything to do with fish, or do they smell a bit dodgy? I don't know, something that's a bit dodgy in the text. But it's there to mislead you, and it adds to the fun of actually reading crime and thriller novels. But what you need to do as an author is make sure that they're balanced out, because if you have too few, then the crime, the motive will be really easy to solve. Too many, it's just confusing, and you're going to lose the reader's interest, really. It's going to be all plot and no character. So you need to balance them out, and also the author needs to be fair on the reader. We all hate it when we've read a book and it turns out in the last chapter that the murderer just happens to be the twin brother of one of the characters that you've never heard of before and has just been introduced in the last chapter. So be fair to the reader. So it is actually somebody that's been in the story. It's not something pulled out of a hat at the end of the last minute. And also be fair to the reader, make sure that the loose ends are tied up at the end. So you might have some really good red herrings and then find out that perhaps one of the characters, just off the top of my head, was convicted of murder a while ago, and then it's just dropped, and you want to find out more about that. It might not be relevant to actually who did this murder, but you want to find out a bit more, so it just seems that it's there unnecessarily. So tie up the ends. But of course, the one exception to this is if you're going to write a sequel, because then you don't want all the ends to be tied up, don't you? Because you want the reader to go and read the next book. It's not one more page, one more chapter, it's one more book.
Picking up on your idea of misdirection there, I was just thinking that the queen of that is Sarah Pinborough's Behind Her Eyes, which was made into
wow, that's fantastic, isn't it? Yeah.
And without giving anything away, just in case you haven't watched it, it is just brilliantly worked through. People who say, oh, I don't understand the ending, came out of nowhere. It doesn't come out of nowhere, definitely not in the book. If you go back, you can actually see the clues and the tweaks and the things that you don't notice. I guess the best way of showing if that misdirection has worked is when the reader wants to go back and read the book again, just to find those little clues that they might have missed the first time around.
That's right, and they should be able to as well. You should be able to look back and you see those clues there. When you read it at the same time, you think, oh, I can't believe I didn't see that because I was misdirected or I fell for that red herring.
You missed the gorilla in the room.
Yes, you did. One thing that I just wanted to add as well about page turners before we move on is getting your first line right, because quite a lot of readers might, if they're not hooked straight away, we live in an age where we've got quite short attention spans, they might not carry on. Literary novels, you can take more time to really sort of gear up, but with page turners, you want to hook the reader immediately. So, and the example that I'm going to give you is from Brighton Rock by Graham Greene. And the first line is, Hale knew before he'd been in Brighton 3 hours that they meant to murder him. Whoa, who's Hale? What's he doing in Brighton? Who wants to murder him? It makes you want to read on. And this brings me on to character, because I want to find out more about Hale, his character, what he's doing there. And to be a page turner, you really have to be invested in the characters. Now, this doesn't mean you've got to like them. They don't have to be your best friend. They don't have to be people that you'd want to go down the pub and have a chat with. But you've got to actually care about what happens to them. An example that Louise and I were chatting about before was Gone Girl. The main characters are Amy and Nick. Now, both aren't likable at all. And you wouldn't want them to be your neighbours, but you really want to find out who's telling the truth, who's misleading you, who actually is to blame without giving the story away. So you want to read on and carry on. Now, there are lots of different structural ways of telling a character story. Firstly, you've got to decide whether you're going to write from the first person, where you're straight in that, you're in that character's head, you're hearing their thoughts, or are you going to write it in a third person where there's a narrator that's telling you the story and that can flip between different characters and their thoughts. And then you've got to think about the past. You're going to use the past tense or the present tense. Now, the writing in the present tense, it can make everything feel really immediate, that you're with that action as it's happening. So that's a great way to hook you in. But then, of course, it's harder to find out about things that have happened in the past, which you may need to know about or adds more context to the story. So what I've done with My Perfect Sister is I've used a bit of both. So the majority of the story is told first person present tense from Annie's point of view, our heroine. But there are things that Annie just can't know because she wasn't around when they happened. And there's also more information about other characters that she doesn't know that can add to the interest of the story. So I have some flashbacks in third person back to the day when her sister Gemma went missing. And another reason why I quite like this technique means that the reader can then be in on a bit of information that Annie doesn't know. So that can sort of be one up for the reader, really.
A good one for switching point of view is Gone Girl again, isn't it? Because you've got the first bit, which is from the one point of view, and then suddenly the whole book just switches in the second half, and what you've been told in the first half is then completely kind of upended by the character in the second half.
Yeah,
and
that's
really
structure.
Really interesting what you're saying about that the characters don't have to be completely likable all the time. They have to be interesting but not likable. And I think we were both talking about the television show I Care a Lot, which was on Amazon Prime.
Yeah,
Rosamund Pike.
Yeah, Rosamund Pike, that's right. And that's brilliant because her character is horrible. She's a nasty piece of work, but you care. You don't like her, but you want to see her get her comeuppance, and you really care what happens about her in the plot. Plus, there are also a few little moments where she's humanized, where you actually start to like her because she might, she does or says something when she's being victimized that she stands up for. So what
she cons old people out of their homes and their money. There's no way she's a likable character, but you do keep watching to find out what happens to her. In fact, none of the characters are particularly likable in that show. Not even the nice old who you think is the nice old lady at the start. She's not even completely likable either. But yeah,
think he's going to be the nice character that you'll be rooting for, but
yeah.
Well, again, better not give the rest of the story away. So, moving on, some books have multiple narrators. If you don't just want to have one person's point of view, or maybe two. The classic is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. There's also the thriller The Girl Before by J.P. Delaney and Paula Hawkins' Into the Water. It can add lots of different perspectives, different points of view to the story, and brilliant again at misdirection and what have you. Who do you believe? But if you use this technique, it's got to be it's important that you don't have too many, because you'll just end up confusing the reader. You'll end up losing their interest and breaking the sort of spell of the world that you've created. And you've got to make sure as well that the reader can easily differentiate between the different voices and perspectives. So it might be something as simple as don't have two characters called Bob, because who are you going to know who you're talking at? But it's also that the speech that they use for them, perhaps the tone and what have you, are very different. So you can recognize which character is.
The trick is if the chapter heading was taken away with whichever character name it was, you'd still know the character.
And finally, make sure that the characters and their actions are believable. Again, or you'll lose the reader's attention and interest. So the plot should fit the character rather than the character fitting the plot. So having a character that does something completely out of context or that you never thought they would do, you end up just not believing it. What? Well, they wouldn't do that. And I was actually watching I'm a massive Line of Duty fan. And again, I won't give anything away, but a couple of episodes ago, something happened. And I love that show. I was so engrossed. And then a character did something. I thought, what? couldn't do that. So it sort of snapped me out of the moment until we went on to a different part of the plot. And then, of course, I was straight back in again. But make sure that it's believable, definitely.
And I think characters have to want something. So, for example, at the start of Sleepless, Thea wants to get more sleep. That's her want. But for fully rounded characters and for their character journey, they also have to need something deeper as well. So even though Thea wants to sleep, what she actually needs is more human interaction. She needs to open herself up a bit more. She needs to make some human connections and not just hide away. And that's her emotional journey then during the book. So it's about wants and desires. Your character has to want something, but they also have to need something more. And the best characters have both of those, have both that kind of thing.
And in My Perfect Sister, Annie, she doesn't know it, but what she actually wants is to get over her childhood and move on and be at peace with what's happened to her in the past. But of course, at the beginning, she doesn't know that. She thinks it's fine. So the reader follows her, or I don't really like saying this word, her journey, because she's not actually going anywhere, but the emotional arc as she continues through the story.
So then we move on to chapters, and your chapters within your book are really important, obviously, because they make up the book. If the book doesn't have any chapters, you don't have a book. Some people don't write in chapters. I think it's Terry Pratchett who never really wrote in chapters, but he always used to have very short, he used to have spaces between the different things that happened. And for me, I tend to keep my chapters fairly short. So I write about 1,500 words for each chapter. And I think if you're, imagine yourself when you're reading at night and you think, oh, I'll just read one more chapter because I want to find out what happens next. And you do the thing where you flick through the book and see how long the chapter is. Yeah. It's a really long one. You're going to put that away until the next day, aren't you? But if it's a shorter one, you're going to hook the reader in and get them to actually turn that page. So, and it doesn't always have to be something dramatic as well that you end the chapter on. So try to end your chapter on some sort of cliffhanger, but it's not an EastEnders kind of duff moment. It's not it's not that kind of thing all the time, because that's exhausting for a reader to constantly be having those kind of moments. In a book, you have to have your light and your shade. You have to have the quieter moments so that when the noisier moments come, they have more impact. You can't have it as all noise. You'll give your reader a headache. So an example for Sleepless, which was quite a pivotal moment, there is a, funnily enough, seems to be a theme, there is a death of one character at the end of the chapter in the original draft that I did. And when I was revising it, I realised that really I should end on Thea struggling to reach out to that character and the reader not knowing what happened at that point, for me to keep them in that moment of peril and actually then hold the death off for the next chapter, so that the reader has to turn the page to find out what happens to that chapter, to that character, sorry. And that's kind of your goal, really, is to make the reader turn the page there. But when you think of chapters, you have to think of them almost as mini little arcs of their own. Something has to happen in that chapter, even if it's two characters sat at a table talking to each other. You can have that as your whole chapter, that's fine, as long as those characters are revealing lots of nice juicy information and tidbits about their character. That would be brilliant. Or maybe they're plotting or planning something, or it shows the power play between them, then that's fine. But if you've just got a chapter and if you took it out of your book, it wouldn't be felt, then you need to take it out of your book in that case, because it's not doing anything for it. It's creating the flabby middle, which, is not what you want. We've already decided that you don't want your flabby middle. So think very carefully, and actually that's why the plotting board helps me there, because I can actually look at chapters that are perhaps very similar and could maybe be merged into one, or chapters that are just not needed. They were, great fun to write, and you enjoyed them and you had lots of witty things to say, but in the end they have to go.
We've talked a lot, Louise, now about the rules. What do you think about breaking them? Do you think that would ever work?
I think that you have to know rules very well before you can break them. So I wouldn't, as a debut author, I've got my first novel out, I wouldn't at this point feel confident enough to completely break all the rules, because I'm still, learning and developing my craft. I think you can definitely, rules are made to be broken. You can still break all of those things if you want to. But I think you have to know them very well to start off with. What do you think?
You do, I agree. You've got to be very clever. And I'm thinking about something like Stuart Turton's. Is it The 7 Deaths of Evelyn
Hardcastle?
It's a fantastic book, but you really have to concentrate. It's got so many different characters. You switch from all these points of view. It's sort of, it might not break the rules, but it really bends them. But it's a fantastic book, and it's a master class really in plotting and what have you, and character. But that must have been extremely difficult for him to pull off. So I agree with you that you need to know your rules first off and be very, very comfortable with them before actually trying to bend them or break them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think everything that we've talked about today, I mean, that doesn't just go into creating a page turner. You can use a lot of those ideas and the kind of stuff that we've talked about if you're writing literary fiction, if you're not, writing something where you maybe want to get the reader to turn the page all the time. And to make the point, like I said earlier, it's not always about turning the page. You have to have those moments of quiet. You have to have those moments of the calm within the storm. Otherwise, it becomes very exhausting to read the book.
It does. I wonder if we've got any questions. I've kept the Q&A in the chat box shut just whilst we were talking, so I wasn't just multitasking at the time. So I've just opened up the Q&A box, and there's one from Jessica Linfoot. When ideally would the inciting incident occur? Could it occur as late as a 4th or 5th chapter, or is that too late? I do think that perhaps you need an inciting incident at the beginning or pretty close to the beginning, but that doesn't mean there can't be more than 1 or 2. That you can have some more to create more jeopardy or perhaps change the plot. Do you agree, Louise?
I think that you're right. I don't think it doesn't have to be just one massive inciting incident. I think you can have a few little things happening. I don't think it has to happen straight away in the first paragraph. Depending on what your first paragraph is, I guess. If your first paragraph is just a trip to the shops and you go through your shopping list, it's not the best way to start your page turner. But I think you can definitely have more than one, because really the one I gave as the example for Thea was more than one. It was the car accident, but it's also the notification popping up on a phone. And I think you don't have to. I think writers tie themselves up in knots about this first chapter. I think it's because when you're submitting work, it's the first 3 chapters that go off. I think sometimes it depends on the story you're telling, and sometimes you need to feel your way into that story a little bit. There's stuff that you need to describe and explain, and you need to meet certain characters before things happen. So it's really dependent on your story, I think.
I think it might depend on the genre as well, because again, with literary fiction, there is more room, more space for you to actually get to know your characters. But with commercial fiction, I know that editors, they want to be hooked straight away. They want to know what it's about straight away, what the what if is. So if you are writing a commercial page turner, I think you're best to get that inciting incident definitely within the first or the second chapter to keep people hooked.
Mm-hmm.
There's another question here, Susan Birch. What are your thoughts on prologues? Well, I did a course with Faber Academy. They're writing a novel the first 6 months, and there's a lot of discussion about prologues because apparently some readers can't stand them. They don't know why they should be there, and other readers really like them. So I think about prologues, it depends on just what in your gut feels right for your book. I have a prologue in My Perfect Sister, and I wanted it there it's a sort of a flashback to the day that Gemma went missing, and it immediately sets the sort of tense atmosphere of the novel. So I felt it needed to be there to give you a sense of what that novel is going to be about. It's only a page or so, but I felt that it was necessary to set the tone. You haven't got one in Sleepless, have you?
No, it never had a prologue. I know that some agents have got a real hatred for prologues as well, haven't they, when they're talking?
It's a real Marmite thing, I think.
Yeah, it is. The only thing that annoys me about prologues sometimes is if you can tell the author has deliberately put it in to try and hook the reader in, but you don't know who the characters are, you don't know the peril, you're not really sure what's going on, and then suddenly it all changes in chapter 1. You think, I'm not sure that really needed to be there. If your chapter 1 should be good enough to do that stuff. So it depends on how well you do it. I guess really for my second book, it is a prologue, chapter 1, but I'm just calling it chapter 1 because that's an easy way out of it, isn't it? Because it is actually taking it back to when my main character is small and why her mother, made them run from the house. So yes, it is technically a prologue, but I'm just calling it chapter 1, and that's a tip. There you go.
You heard it here first. Now we've got Kathy Ashley. What about the inciting incident happening before the start of the novel, but the protagonist has lost all memory of it? Can it be there as a ghost that filters in and the actual incident is revealed near the end?
So I guess this is a little bit like Before I Go to Sleep. So it's not like that, but it's the idea of the main protagonist can't remember, is it, what is going on. So your hook is really the gradual reintroduction of that memory, isn't it? So yes, though I would argue that possibly there needs to be something that starts jolting that memory process. Otherwise that character might continue because the brain is an amazing thing, doesn't it? It shoots up these defenses after a traumatic incident, and the brain can actually hide things from yourself quite well. So I would argue that maybe there's got to be something that kickstarts that memory process.
So the inciting incident would be that something happens to make that memory start to come back. There's some sort of PTSD or flashback, and then we later in the novel we want to know what that was, and then it's revealed later in the novel, so we've got suspense to find out what actually was and what that inciting incident was. So you've got 2 inciting incidents, really, haven't you?
Yeah. I hope we helped with that one. I think there does still need to be some sort of little inciting incident there just to kickstart it all. I've got one from the chat here, which is, does a page turner, I've missed it, there it is. Does a page turner need a hero and a villain?
Well, I think we've said before that certainly with Gone Girl, there isn't really any hero. There's a policewoman who certainly wants to get to the bottom of the truth, but there isn't a sort of traditional goodie and baddie. So I would say no, actually. You don't have to have a hero and a villain.
But do you have to have a villain, though, in that case?
Well, then there's no tension if you don't have a villain, is there? I mean, I know in Sleepless you have Thea, the heroine, and then you have, well, you don't
quite a few.
It is, yeah, quite a few villains, murderous types on the island. And I suppose in My Perfect Sister, there is a villain who is the murderer, but we don't know who it was, or even if there was a murder. It's suspected that there was. So I think I would say, well, again, go with your gut. I'm a great believer in going with what feels right to you. If you can get the tension in, the suspense without a hero and a villain, then good on you. But it's probably easier when you're starting off. Do you have a hero and a villain? Would you say so, Louise?
I think I do, really, don't I? Thea's the hero, and then you've got the various people who run, or even the sleep technology company itself is the villain. Remember, a villain doesn't have to be a person. A villain can be a job that you've gone into. The villain can be an emotion, like, suffering from being an alcoholic. That's your villain then. So don't think of heroes and villains in terms of people all the time as well. But I think you have to have, a story works on tension. If you don't have any tension, you don't have a story. So in reductive terms, hero and villain is a good way to explain that, because there you go, there's your tension. But tension can come from lots of different things as well.
A villain might be a situation, mightn't it? It might not be a person, but about a really awful, difficult situation that a person has got into. So with Thea on the island, that the fact that she can't get off that's a sort of villainous thing in itself.
The island becomes a character a little bit in its own right. Yeah, the island is the villain.
It's not somewhere you want to go on a nice day trip with your picnic, is it really?
I don't know. There people go to Chernobyl nowadays. So and I just love writing villains, people villains. They're just so much fun. They're great fun to write. You can just let your imagination go wild, really, and do all the things that you can't do in real life because you'll get arrested. You can do that as a villain. So I do have soft spots for actual people villains. I do like writing them.
Like cathartic writing villains, because you can do all the things that you'd never dream of doing in real life. There's a new question in. Do you prefer to type everything at the end of the book, or leave something for the reader to think about? Well, I think I mentioned earlier on about sequels. If you know you're going to write a sequel, then you obviously need to leave something open. But personally, with my novels, I like to leave things sort of to the plot's wrapped up, but then there's always something a bit open. So you wonder what actually will be happening in that universe when the story is ended. I like there to be enough open there for the reader to come to their own conclusions about what that character may do next, or what they may be thinking. So it's not all particularly it's got to be rounded up in terms of the plot, so you feel you have a satisfying ending. Because if you get to the end of a book and you don't actually find out what happens, well, that's not very good, is it? That's breaking the rules. But I like that universe to continue in the reader's mind long after they've actually finished reading that last page.
Yeah. I actually had a very different ending to the one that ended up in the book, because it's very hard not to give stuff away, so I can't give anything away, because I was very keen that my main character Thea can't overthrow a massive technology company. That just can't happen. She's one woman on her own. She can't do that. She's not MacGyver, as I believe I said last night. So I did have to create an ending that gave people a little bit of hope, because I didn't want to. Remember, I was editing this novel during the pandemic as well. The pandemic had actually just started when I began editing the novel. So I was very aware that I didn't want to send something out into the world that was so completely bleak. The book is pretty, there's a lot of, death and mind manipulation and all of that stuff going on. I wanted to have some sort of hope at the end, even though somebody like Thea couldn't overthrow a company. So I tried to give it, I think it is important to have that satisfying ending, that idea that that's where the story naturally concludes.
With your book, though, it can be the ending, again, not trying to give anything away, but it can be read two ways. So
Yeah.
you think you know what's happened, but you're not quite sure. There's still that possibility there that actually something else might have happened or could happen, which leaves you in suspense at the end of the book.
Yeah. That's a little bit what I was aiming for. I wanted to leave them a little bit with, it's that idea of hope, isn't it? I just couldn't end that novel without a bit of hope. And actually thinking about it now, weirdly, because I've ended it in that way, it actually is starting to give me ideas for a sequel, because, you know, you don't know completely what happens to those characters, and they could very easily be having a life somewhere, doing stuff. And Laura is very nice, because she's just said the ending is superb. She loved it. Thank you, Laura. That's lovely. You're my favourite person in the webinar now. You win a badge for being the favourite one. And also, I did miss Susan as well, who says, your novels sound fab. I know what my next read shall be, which is very nice, isn't it? That's very kind. I think we've really enjoyed doing this, haven't we, Penny? It's been good fun.
We have done, and we're going to do a very quick plug. If you want to follow us on social media, or perhaps ask us some questions on Twitter or what have you, do keep in touch. I think on the handout we've got all the information that you need to know, but a very quick spiel. I'm Penny_author on Twitter, Penny Author on Facebook, Penny Batchelor Author on Instagram, because I couldn't get all the same ones on all the social media. And you can find my website at www.pennybatchelor.co.uk. Signed copies are available from Kenilworth Books. My Perfect Sister is available in ebook and paperback, and you can pre-order my next novel, Her New Best Friend, in ebook and paperback too. How about you, Louise? Your quick plug.
Very quickly, Twitter, Louise_Mumford, then Instagram and Facebook is Louise Mumford Author. I have a website where you can sign up to a newsletter and get a free, very dark, short story. And my book is available on Amazon, and signed copies are available at Griffin Books, which is my local bookshop in Penarth. We really do appreciate all the readers and people who leave reviews and people who say lovely comments like Laura just then. That's, you know, that is
our day, doesn't it? It really makes our day.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So thank you for buying and reading books and supporting authors.
And do keep in touch. Ask us what our favourite thrillers are and things. Have a bit of a conversation. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for that. That was amazing. Thanks, everyone. I think the session will probably end now, but that was great. Thanks so much.